Good evening and welcome to Luminary. I'm Adam Griffith. I'm the Managing Director here at Luminary. And I'd firstly like to thank you all for coming tonight. I know we all live very busy lives. We really appreciate you coming along and hearing all about Headless. I'd also like to say a big thanks to our partners and vendors, Sitecore, Kentico, Acoustic, formerly IBM, and Contentful for supporting us with this event. We're really excited to have our panelists here tonight. And Andy's going to introduce them. Andy's our CTO, one of the directors here at Luminary, and he's going to give you guys a quick run through of Headless, what it is and why. So I'll hand over to Andy now. Kick it off.
Thanks very much, Adam. So I won't bore you. You're here to see these guys tonight, not me. But as a bit of a quick intro, for the next roundabout hour and a bit, we're going to be focusing on, first of all, just a very quick intro from me to set the scene, make sure everyone understands what we're talking about, what I mean by headless, and basically why you would use it. So I'm guessing some of the reasons you might be here tonight. Then I'm going to introduce you to our vendor expert panel. I'll give them a chance to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about who they are, where they're from, and why they might be here on the panel tonight. Then we're going to move into a panel discussion. We should last, it's hard to know, about 45 minutes, where I'll be asking them some questions. They'll be answering some questions. Might be a bit of chit chat. I've told them to keep their gloves on for tonight because they are competitors. And then we'll move into some questions from the audience. Throughout the session, we'll be using Slido. I'll have the link on the screen. If you don't feel like speaking up at the end, or you come up with a question while someone's talking, you can jump on slido.com with the tag headless and add questions, and I'll get to them at the end as well. So first of all, Adam already introduced me, so I don't need to talk about me. Headless CMS, so what is it? In a nutshell, a headless CMS is just pure content management without any presentation layer or front end. That's what we're talking about. So that's why we say headless, is because they've basically chopped the head or the face off the CMS. You get in and you manage purely content. All that's coming out of a headless CMS is what you can see on the right there. It comes out through an API, and all you're getting is the content, the data. It's coming out usually in structure like JSON, structured text. So developers just consume that and use it anyway. So that's the point here. A headless CMS doesn't render out web pages. It just gives you the content, and you render it yourself. One of the key points around that is that it's optimized for delivery to a number of channels, not just web pages. So it's not focused, it's not a web CMS necessarily, can be, but it's focused on many channels, be that mobile apps or social media or websites or Internet of Things, VR, all these things. So why use it? Bit of an intro. Why would you consider using a headless CMS? The main reasons we see as an agency, and hopefully some of these points might resonate with some people in the audience. If you need a centralized content hub and you want to share your content across multiple channels, so you're not just building a website, you might want to have a lot of content that might go to multiple websites and mobile apps and digital signage or interactive displays in a store or e-commerce systems, PIMs, all this sort of stuff. Another reason might be if you or your organization just have that content first mindset. You actually want to tackle your content first and worry about building out how it's displayed later. Another example might be if you are rolling out a software as a service based infrastructure or a microservices infrastructure. These are some nice modern buzzwords for you. Or if you want or need tight control over your presentation layer, that might mean that you have, say, a team that really wants to build your website or your app with a given technology that isn't supported by one of the CMSs, and you get to just integrate your content management system. Or it might mean you're working with an older presentation layer and you need to integrate a content management system into it. That's a really good use case as well. But that's enough from me about why. You didn't come to hear from me, so it's time to hear from our panel. I'm going to throw over to the panel now to introduce themselves and say a little bit about them. I know they're in a different order on the screen, sorry about that, but we do have pictures. So I might just start at this end and move along. Why don't you introduce yourself, Mick?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Mick Wingert. So I work for Sitecore. I've actually been fortunate actually to be in this industry for about 15 years now. So I come from a development background. That's where I started everything, and sort of worked my way up and have enjoyed sort of that 15 years working across quite a few technologies. Predominantly Sitecore over the journey, but I have, like I said, fortunate enough to work through a lot of the ones that sitting here and some not, but yeah, it's been a good journey. In terms of Sitecore, I'm not sure how many people might know who we are and what we do. So Sitecore, we do have, or our core, I guess, where we came from is definitely web content management. So that started around 2001. We've sort of evolved over the journey now where we actually provide digital experience as a platform. So it's not just content delivery now, it's all about optimization and personalization. So, being able to achieve a bit more out of what the traditional content management system is. So here to talk about Headless, really looking forward to it. So yeah, me.
Thanks, Mick. So next we'll move on to Matt from Acoustic, who you may not have heard of yet.
Cool. All right, I'm Matt Mccoy. I work for Acoustic, and I have for about 2 weeks, because that's about how long Acoustics existed as a company. We say we're formerly IBM, so I guess the old reaction was IBM does headless content. Wow. Most of you probably know IBM. Basically, IBM Watson marketing, which is around campaign automation, customer analytics, personalization, content. We've actually shaved off that part of IBM, and that's becoming this new business called Acoustic, and it's about 1,200 people around the world, and about 3,500 customers all around the different capabilities. So that's brand new, but I've actually been with IBM, I think, a similar amount of time. About maybe 10 years, and I've worked in solutions delivery, consulting, and now in solution architecture and being a solution engineer. And so that's been very fortunate, but Acoustic, hopefully we're able to be a little bit more nimble. As much as I love IBM, it's very large, and Acoustic's much smaller. Hopefully we can be a bit more nimble and a bit more aggressive than IBM will be. So that's me.
Thanks, Matt. So next we have Boris from Kentico.
Hey everyone, some of you may already seen me, know me. I'm a senior solution architect at Kentico. I've wrote a content modeling ebook, so that's something on topic when it comes to Headless. I'm running content modeling workshops, doing solution architecture, answering RFPs, pretty much anything within the company. We as Kentico, we've been on the market for 15 years now. We launched a Headless CMS 4 years ago, and I've been part of the journey 11 years or so over a decade, which is also quite a while. Yeah, if you have any follow-up questions, let me know. You can catch me afterwards. I will be sticking around for a bit.
Thanks very much, Boris. And now we'll throw all the way over to Berlin. Thanks for getting up early for us, Paul.
Oh, you bet. Can everyone hear me okay? Just give me a thumbs up if so. All right, perfect. Yes, our first audience engagement. Well, coming at you live from Berlin, thanks for inviting me. I will admit that I'm a little bit jealous that I didn't get to participate in the free cocktails. So I'm drinking coffee instead of wine, but I'm sure we'll work that out. So at Contentful, I run the product marketing team, but I'm actually a recovering product manager. My last 2 roles were running the analytics dashboards for Cloudability, a cloud optimization company that's just got bought by Apptio. And prior to that, I ran the analytics and optimization product line at Urban Airship, mobile engagement vendor. So anyways, I can commiserate with both the engineering and marketing side of the house, depending on who's out there this evening in the audience. As for Contentful, super happy to be here. We were one of the kind of first headless platforms that was native on AWS, and we're just really watching all of the companies kind of adopt the public cloud and headless vendors like all of us here along with it. So it's a really exciting time to be talking about this topic.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. So again, just a quick reminder, we're about to launch in. I'll start asking them some questions, but if I'm not asking the questions you want to hear, please do chuck them on Slido or a bit later, we will move into a bit of an audience interaction Q&A. So just a reminder there, you're not stuck to the questions I'm going to ask them. Please collect your own questions as well. So we'll kick it off. Oh, I won't stand up and sit down too much. It squeaked. I might kick it off with the first question I had anyway, is one that's probably on the minds of a lot of people who haven't adopted it before. What do you see as the main drivers for people who are selecting a headless approach to content management? I don't know, does anyone want to volunteer to go first? Matt, do you want to go first? No? Mick? Oh, Mick's got the mic. We'll go with Mick.
First, why not? Main drivers. Yeah, so there's actually a lot of drivers. Main drivers, look, I think it comes down to a lot about what you're trying to achieve. What's actually the business objectives you're trying to achieve out of the platform, as well as if you're thinking about omni-channel experiences, what are the actual channels the content's actually trying to go out to? If you sit there and say we've only got sort of one channel, then that's a discussion to have. But if you know that your content is looking to go across different channels, devices, IoT, lots of those different things now, that's where you should really start thinking about, well, headless actually can be a really great fit for that particular that particular project you're looking to embark on. Right.
Quick reminder, this doesn't apply to you, Paul, because you've got a loudspeaker, but we've got a pretty good attendance tonight, so there's people right down the back. So pretend you're talking to Adam right down the back there when we're yelling out. I think that was good, Nick, okay? But just in case, use your outside voice. Thanks.
Sure. Well, look, I agree with that. I think the only thing I'd maybe add as well is as a business, if you think about all of the places where you interact with customers, each of those is really an opportunity. And so there's a lot of kind of dumb interactions that we do. We just do the bare minimum. Whereas when you've got a headless CMS, you can think this content I could be using anywhere. I could be using in store, I could be using on digital signage, on the website, in the mobile app, and it could be consistent across all of that. Then suddenly it's not just a series of interactions, it's a whole journey. And so that's where really headless, I think, gives you that platform for doing it rather than having a website focus and a mobile app focus. So yeah.
Thanks. Well, Boris, you got a mic as well?
Yeah, sure. So we see it similarly. So we are in the same game, and I think there are quite a few similarities. Yeah, depends who you ask. But what I see more and more often is what's driving the headless adoption is also the internal drive of companies and the maturity of the business. So what I've seen is that if a company is more mature with their content, and if they consider content to be their main asset, the most important thing they have in the company, they are starting to look at headless solutions. So they are not focusing on web only, they are focusing on their content, and they're approaching all the projects content first, not as another website, another app. Of course, there are other drivers as well, as mentioned, omnichannel, for example, integration with best-of-breed solutions, or having a simple microservice architecture where you can switch out certain areas of the system. So if you come across something which you can't use in the end in your architecture, it's easier to switch out the given component. So yeah, there are a few drivers. As I said, from my point of view, it's mostly an internal driver of the client. Most of the time, it's the client who is pushing for a headless approach as we see it.
Thanks, Boris. Let's go over to Paul.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I completely agree that omni-channel and kind of a microservices or stack approach to your MarTech stack are definitely huge drivers. And I guess one of the other points I'd add is if you look more holistically at kind of the people, processes, and tech that companies use to go to market, one of the other big shifts that we're seeing is that there's a lot more software being created in-house. You know, a website is now more or less a software application. And so there's a lot of companies who are kind of reconfiguring their teams around that paradigm, where you see websites owned by product managers and either folks like Luminary helping them build it out, or actually hiring in-house kind of front-end developers to build it out so that they have bespoke brand experiences. And so one of the other big things that's driving headless is you've got these new cross-functional digital teams that are composed of back-end, front-end, analysts, SEO experts, content creators, the full stack. And when you move to that kind of software mentality, headless fits really well into those, which are often, you know, cloud-based stacks, and it fits very well into that new operating model where you're thinking about, you know, the old model popularized was COPE, create once, publish everywhere, but now it's more like COAS, or, you know, create once, ship everywhere. When you move from shipping to publishing as a team, that's really where headless comes into play.
Great, thanks, Paul. So I guess that's all sort of hypothetical situations. So I will give you guys an opportunity to talk about it in specifics. So try to talk to me about one example you can think of where implementing headless has been really, really effective for an organization. Maybe let's just come backwards this time. Paul, do you just want to, while you've got the conch, go for it?
Yeah, actually, let's see. Good question. Where do we start? So one example that I've seen work particularly well with a customer I was just chatting with, TELUS, one of Canada's big telcos. They were in this predicament where they have, well, not predicament, but they were, so that every time there's a new cell phone launch, in this case, it was the Galaxy S8, they had 5 business units and 7 different content repositories, and in multiple channels, they had, you know, mobile sites, web apps, voice assistants. And so the challenge was, you know, very, very similar to all the things we discussed here. You know, they had an omni-channel presence. They were moving to a more kind of public cloud-based microservices architecture, and they wanted to kind of pick the best tools for all the right purposes. But more importantly, they had all the siloed content. So one of the times you see Headless CMS come into play is not just the kind of delivery to multiple channels, but also the back end where you're kind of federating content from 7 different content repositories. And so what they were trying to do was kind of put a Headless CMS in the middle, or as we call it, content infrastructure, kind of in the middle, and slowly be able to rethink how they launch a phone. So when they launched the Galaxy S8, you know, prior to that, they would have to update the phone information in their support portal, and update the phone information in their kind of mobile marketing campaigns, and update the phone information on their B2B sites and their B2C sites, because they serve both businesses and consumers. And so there's just a lot of moving parts. So every time they get all this phone information, they basically have to copy and paste it in 7 different places. But instead, when you start looking at a Headless CMS as both a federation system and a delivery system, they were able to put all the content in one kind of content system of record, or content hub, and then be able to federate it out to all those different business units and their 30 plus digital products or platforms. And so what they saw was it took them like 2 weeks to get prior phone information across all these systems, down to like 4 days. And they just gave a presentation at O'Reilly about how that's progressed, where now for the iPhone 10 launch, or iPhone X, depending on how Apple wants you to discuss it, in Canada, for the first 15 to 20 minutes when the iPhone 10 went live, they were actually the only game in town where you could get an iPhone 10, which is really one of the major switching opportunities for a cell phone company. They beat Apple to market because the Apple website was still updating. They beat some of the other kind of cell phone vendors whose sites were still updating. And so they were just super thrilled about this new model of being able to kind of enter their content in one place, and then have that, you know, sent out to all the other business units and systems downstream that needed to be in place for a phone launch.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, really, really great example of that, specific example of that centralized hub and the efficiencies you get out of that. Thanks. Boris?
So from our side, I think one of the biggest success stories would be, for example, Starbucks. In this case, they have an internal app where they use this app to upskill all the workers, all the employees, because what they wanted to achieve was they wanted all the employees to be across all the new brews, all the new coffees which are being currently released. Previously, again, the content was in different content silos. It was quite difficult to keep track what's being released, to keep updated what's currently being served. So I think Starbucks has around 200,000+ employees. And what I want to highlight here is also that Headless isn't only replacing existing technologies, it's also being ready for the future. And in this case, they think of a headless approach and a content hub approach as preparation for the future. They can connect to any technology which is just, you know, starting to emerge on the market. They are not locked into any of the front ends they currently have. They have content readily available for all these channels. So they think of it as a spark for innovation within their company. So yeah, that would be my example.
Great, thanks, Boris. Yeah, so I guess freeing up those options and not getting locked in is a really great point. Matt, over to you.
Because we're recording this, I won't name them, but some of the retailers that we work with here, just as a really specific example, for them, often content is not where they generate revenue. Their main site, it's a commerce site. You know, it's all about ordering, it's all about stock, it's all about inventory. It's lots of different things. It's not a content site. You wouldn't want to run it as a website. So previously, they were always kind of locked in by what they chose as their commerce engine. And that really forced their hand for what their front end looked like. So for them, moving to a headless approach really gave them full freedom to own that front end, to make it exactly the way they wanted, and to really accelerate the development. And then they could have the best of breed commerce backend, the best of breed order management, the best of breed marketing, social, and then that way content could come from our content engine and really be used there to help generate revenue. So places where content is critical, but it's not just a content site, it's actually a commerce engine, a hotel booking engine, a trip booking engine. I think that's a really, really good example of where content being headless is important and useful.
Thanks, Matt. Brilliant. Mick?
Thanks. Similar to Matt, I'm not going to name names, but yeah, it is safer. Look, I think from our perspective, we work with a commercial property developer, and they use CMS to drive their web channel. But when you then go visit the actual properties themselves, you need to go in and they have digital signage sitting up within those properties. So being able to reuse that content in a central location is a big driver for them, not just the screens, but they also have kiosks. So when you actually enter one of the properties, being able to go onto the kiosk and find information about the property itself and location-based information, all of that's coming from a centralized system and being fed out to all of these different channels. So kiosks being one of them. So and sort of interestingly as well, a little bit of a tidbit, but also from a toilet perspective, they actually have little surveys in the toilet. So when you exiting, you can basically say, "How was your experience?" So that actually feeds back to the cleaners, the cleaner system. So they actually can drive a lot more efficiency in understanding where they need to actually prioritize their cleaning efforts. So they actually have big reductions on cost in their cleaning system. So, you know, they've got all of these different, we'll call them touch points. It's sort of getting a little bit weird now, isn't it? But yeah, I think that's a really good example of, you've definitely got that omni-channel experience, and centralized content is one of those main drivers there for sure.
Right. Yeah.
You didn't think it was going to go there, did you?
No, didn't see that one coming. I don't think I want to ask what scale you have to rate your exit on. But
thumbs up.
Yeah. So we've heard a lot here about channels, omni-channel, and flexibility and freedom. So everything from support systems to apps to e-commerce to toilets. What about the people in the room who might be, for now, focused on making a decision around primarily a website? Can I get you to talk about, if you are thinking about a website, should you be considering a headless approach? If so, why? If not, why not?
I think you should always consider a headless approach. I think, you know, Boris and Paul have both touched on this a little bit as well. Sort of the experience that I've had going into a lot of potential customers and sort of talking to them about where they're sort of heading to and the decisions they're making, content always comes up. Call it the content crisis. It's always a similar thing. It's where do you have your content, or where they have their content, and how they're trying to solve that problem to start with. If it's just the web channel, look, there's never going to be a definitive yes or no that you should always choose headless or you should always choose not. It really comes down to understanding what your requirements about the application or the website that you're trying to build. What's the complexity level of it as well? And does that website need to actually integrate with a whole bunch of different areas? So how does that fit within a headless scenario and a headless technology as well? Do you have the freedom to do that? So I think it's understanding the options that you have available to you, weighing those up to make a decision about, is that going to fit my purpose for now? But always not forgetting where you're actually heading to. If you're just wanting to build a website, there would probably be other questions that I would want to be asking on top of that. But if it's just that question, then yeah, I think there's always a why and a why not for that scenario. So yeah, I can't say yes or no, but we can definitely talk about how we could do different approaches for that.
So always consider it, but also maybe consider the future a little bit as well. Yeah.
Always, yeah. It's definitely something that if you look at organisations now, it's not just about the content, but it's about the experience as well. So what's the actual experience you want to drive to your customers? Because customers are a lot more mature now in what they expect from a brand or your brand experience. So how are you going to deliver that? Is it just pure headless CMS content, or is there more that you need to do with that? So that can definitely help drive a decision for sure.
I'm just going to make that thing go away from the TV. A second.
It looks like you're censoring my speech.
Yeah. Which one of those? Oh,
I can't read what it says. Is it funny or not?
Tech support. The Kogan TV wants to turn off in a few minutes. So anyway, we're still active. Let's move on to Matt. So if someone is looking at a purely website, should they go headless, and why or why not?
So if you just want to build a website, oh look, everyone really wants to see this get fixed now. We're rooting for you, Paul. Oh no, it's going to explode in 3 minutes.
That old chestnut.
Yes.
To start, press any key.
Where's the any key?
Yay!
And we're
There
back
we
in.
go. Well done.
Thanks. Marcus Emanuel, everyone. Marcus Emanuel.
Very nice. Very nice.
Sorry, Matt.
Oh, dear.
Just
No,
throwing a spanner in the works for you there. Let's continue. Boris, you can do that next time.
So, look, I was thinking, to be a bit controversial, if you just want to build a website, yeah, no, you should just build it in WordPress, because WordPress is great. But I think the real challenge is, why do you just want to build a website? Like, is that the only way that you interact with your customers? I think that's the real challenge, because then when you get to, well, no, you know, we talk to them in person, we talk to them on chat, we talk to them on social, we have all these different ways of interacting. Then you go, well, a website's not what you actually want. What you actually want is a way of managing that whole experience, which you started to allude to. So I would say, yeah, just build it in WordPress. WordPress is great. But if you want to actually manage that customer experience across everything consistently, then yeah, headless is a really good place to start. So I would almost go for, what is the outcome that you want? What do you want your ideal experience to be? And then work backwards, and headless will be part of that, I think.
Thanks, Matt. Think big.
Yeah, exactly. Like you were saying, guys, I think you have to look into the future. If the website is the last place where the content should appear, yeah, why not use WordPress? Why not use anything else for a simple website build? But if content should be used somewhere else in the future, if the longevity of the content is longer than just a website, then I would already consider a headless approach, even though it's only a small website. Another use case would be if you have a lot of content, collaborating on the content, even though it's a website project only, it's much easier on a solution which was designed as a content hub with collaboration features built in. It's something completely else if you want to manage thousands of pages in WordPress. So yeah, that's from my side, how I see it.
Thanks. Over to you, Paul.
Great. Yeah, no, all good points. I think another thing to consider is if this website is being started from scratch, or if you already have existing MarTech investments that you want to continue to leverage. So for example, if you've already bought Optimizely for A/B testing, or if you're already invested for something like Telium or Adobe Audience Manager for your customer data, and you want to move those things forward, I think Headless is a really good reason to consider that, because I mean, it's all about building a stack, right? You know, a stack of these vendors working together. And I think that's where this approach works well, because, you know, if you've already signed that to your contract with one of those vendors and you want to keep using it and you already have your data in there, you know, I think that would be one other reason to consider Headless for this new website.
Thanks, Paul. I know it's a tougher question, but we are starting to move into the tougher questions, such as this one. I want to talk about, when we talk about a headless approach, we immediately start talking about planning for the future, about integrating with other systems, about being just part of a much larger ecosystem, about building multiple channels, and also not getting things like WordPress is really easy to just get your website done, right? But you're limited there. So what have you seen in terms of the costs involved in projects from a more, I guess, traditional, you know, one size fits all approach to going for more of a headless approach and a microservices architecture? Do you want to start over there, Paul? Big question. Costs.
Costs, big question. So a couple ways to approach it. Like at a macro level, one of our customers just told us that they, after having migrated from a more traditional platform, about 400 of their websites from a more traditional platform to Contentful, they were saving something like $400,000 a year. So there's discrete advantages to moving to a more kind of cloud scale type infrastructure. But in perhaps a better example closer to home, Trent, who runs the digital delivery team at NIB Health, you know, one of the big healthcare providers down in Australia, the journey to headless and to you know, putting their content in this cloud infrastructure. And what they said is the way they think about the world is that every time they launch a new digital touch point or digital experience, it's a business experiment, more or less. So one of the things they've done is, you know, they're primarily based in Australia, but they wanted to start trying to white label their system to offer insurance in New Zealand and also to traveling students and things like that. So every time they spin up one of these new experiments, as they call them, they can do it a lot faster and a lot more cost effectively. So what he was talking about on stage was that the unit cost for launching a new digital product or digital experience was a third of what it had been prior to that, which was they were running it all off of a Microsoft stack on SharePoint primarily. And they not only sped things up by, you know, something like 5 or 6x, but also dropped the unit cost of every new digital product, whether that was a website or a mobile app, by a third. So they were pretty happy with that unit cost of these new experiences.
Thanks, Paul. So I guess that point there is also not just the initial cost, but your ongoing cost savings once you're on that sort of a stack is really good to consider. Boris?
So how we see it is, it depends on the website, of course. You can spin up a headless website for free, pretty much. You've got static site generators, which can generate HTML files, which can be hosted on free hostings. You can, of course, integrate with a multitude of solutions as well. So all this will influence costs in the end. However, what we've seen, what's definitely happening is that the implementation time is much shorter with a headless approach. We've seen that the time to market is much, much shorter. For example, one of our clients in a POC, a proof of concept, they've implemented their POC in a headless approach and with an on-premise solution. And the headless approach took them around 16 hours to implement. Of course, it depends on the tech stack and all the things around it. But yeah, the more traditional approach was, I think, over 100 hours. So what we've seen so far is that really the delivery time is much shorter. Operational costs are also lower in most of the times. So it's not a rule, of course. It depends on a project by project basis, but so far that's the evidence. That's what we are seeing.
Yeah, look, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think you could still spend $1 million on your headless website the same that you could do it with a traditional one. I think the big difference though is, yeah, just that time to market. One of the retailers, different one to before in Australia, I can think they spent about 4 months and they rebuilt their whole online experience, which just boggles my mind. Like 4 months is such a short period of time for them. Live Nation over in the US has 700,000 bits of content, but they could actually respin up their whole, booking and confirmation and ticketing in under 12 months. And so for me, like I look at that and think that's just amazing. Whereas these used to be, multi-year projects. So that speed is really different. And I think people are probably the most expensive resource when you're dealing with headless SaaS services. You can actually scale up pretty gently. You get started low, and then the more that you use it, the more that it might cost. But the people are expensive. So if you can make it easier for them, faster for them, then you're actually saving yourself a lot. So that's what I'd say. That's a bit of a non-answer as well, sorry.
No, that's good. Look, I'll come from it maybe from a little bit of a different angle as well. I think sort of back when I started, it was definitely the era of full stack developers. So you sort of had to do everything. You were a jack of all trades. And the industry sort of shifted a little bit to separating out into their own specializations. So, a back-end developer just in Sitecore didn't really do much in JS or style sheets or CSS. So now we're seeing that industry, or the industry's actually shifted back now to you're starting to get a lot of full stack developers. And I think one of the great things about headless is there's definitely a lower barrier to entry in what that capability is. So, because you're interacting with an API, because I think all of us have really rich SDKs in how you can actually start building with those technologies, you could probably go out on the street and throw a tennis ball and hit a bunch of front-end developers, and they'll all have a really good understanding of either React, Angular, or Vue, or any in between. If you then went out onto the street and threw a ball to find a Kentico or Sitecore developer, that's a little bit different, right? So I think what you get as the breadth of options to that team that you might want to potentially build in-house, that definitely has an effect on what you're trying to build. But I think also, I think Paul mentioned as well, is that you do come from, with a headless scenario, you do actually come from a ground up build more often than not. So don't underestimate what that entire project would look like, and also factor in things like your total cost of ownership over something like 3 years. So, yes, you might have a fragmented MarTech stack, but once you actually put all of those things together, what does that TCO look like, as opposed to potentially other options out there? So yeah, it's not always necessarily licensing, but it's the broader landscape that you would look towards.
Thanks, Mick. You just mentioned, I like that analogy of going outside and throw a tennis ball and you hit someone who can work with headless. And I agree. I think it's we've all talked about it so far, that opening up, that flexibility in terms of technologies you can use, or even different people who might be working on it. Now you've got front end developers doing primarily configuring the site. Have you seen any other changes in the skills or roles that are emerging that you might see in a headless project that less so in a traditional project? Any new roles or new skills or things moving client side or server side? The role changes in a headless sort of environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think I sort of answered that a little bit previously. I think front-end development has become, or has come to the forefront, and it's definitely a lower barrier of entry. So even a front-end developer that doesn't necessarily know React, Angular, Vue, or any of those real common frameworks, it's not hard for them to go ahead and learn those. So from a skill set perspective, it's pretty easy to do that. You'll have that capability. There's definitely, again, one of those shifts over time as well, is that a lot of clients are in-housing their development teams as well. So where you do have some of that capability, that's great. It's also thinking about where you're eventually going to host that application. I mean, yes, you've got the headless APIs, but and getting that content, but you still got to host your website somewhere. So is that something that you're going to do internally in-house? So do you have the capacity and capability of your team to also manage that, or are you going to push that off to a third party company to provision and manage that on an ongoing basis as well? So I think that's one part of it. I think the other part would definitely be around the content side of things as well. So I think everyone knows that marketing teams, traditionally, they're always pretty small, and content authors, you can count them on a single hand. So making sure that they understand the technology as well, how to use it and how to be efficient in it. That's definitely a skill set that has to be learned. So yeah, definitely don't underestimate that either.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, look, I agree. I think the skill market is really opening up there. It used to be like, if you look at that commerce example where you find someone who's an expert in that commerce engine, but also a great web developer, and then can also do the integration, yeah, they're really rare. But now you're dealing with where you can really go and get someone who's a React expert, and they're the best done React expert that you can find for that. And they don't care what content engine you use behind the scenes. They just use it like they would use any. I think the only thing maybe I'd add would be, sounds a bit postmodern, but you can do what's right for you at the time. So, like right now, we have Android and Apple, they're the big ones, but that was different 5 years ago, and it's going to be different in 5 years' time. React is really popular now, but you wind back a couple of years and Angular was all the rage. And then you wind back a few more years and no one's ever heard of it. So those things are changing. And so rather than saying, here's something that we need to then support for the next 10 years and make sure that we have the right skills, we can get the right people with the right skills at the time much more easily, I think. So that really does give flexibility, not just in the platform, but actually the people who are going to keep the lights on, keep it running. And then the next time that you use your headless content, it might be something else completely different. A kiosk is going to be different to digital signage, FPOS machines. They can all be different. They can be what was right for you at the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Boris, new skills or roles?
So what we see these days is it's not only developers and of course all the new technologies, front ends, React, Angular, Vue, and who knows what comes in the future. But what I see also personally is that quite a lot of companies are in need of a content strategist, someone who is in charge of content modeling and actually drafting the content experience within the company. Because with the headless approach, usually the maintenance of the website becomes easier. Things like content production is more streamlined. You actually own the whole content production process back to back. So it also enables you to create much more high quality content. But in order to do that, you have to design your content models, your content assembly model, pretty much anything related to content in a way that it will be highly reusable and that you can use it in the future on any technology, as it was already mentioned here. You don't know what's coming tomorrow, what's coming in a few years. Maybe it's voice, maybe it's VR, AR, who knows? But if you create content which can be reused, which is highly structured, and this kind of content is usually created by content strategist, someone who is skilled on a content level, but also technology level, I would say. Then you prepare content which is ready for the future.
Thanks, Boris. Let's go over to you, Paul. New skills or roles that you're seeing in headless?
Yeah, awesome. Some good examples so far. Some other ones that I can think of. Another huge trend we're seeing is that design is becoming an increasingly important part in kind of brands' bespoke experiences that they're providing for customers as things get more commoditized. And one of the trends within that is we're seeing a lot of companies build these design systems or these modular components that can be reused either by other internal teams or by partners like Luminary, who's trying to build things quickly for a brand, or in the case of ecosystem plays, the ability to build modules on top of other platforms. So, you've seen folks like everyone from Uber and Salesforce and Atlassian to TELUS, the company I had mentioned before about being first to market for the iPhone 10. And all of them have not only created their own design systems and really empowered designers both internally and externally to build things fast on their platforms, but they've also open sourced them. So they're getting community contributions to these design systems to kind of iterate it so they're not on the hook for building the whole thing themselves. And Contentful's done the same thing. We've open sourced our design system so that anyone who's trying to build integrations or modules or full-blown applications on top of us has an existing set of, the number grows daily, but tons of components that people can take advantage of. And importantly, our customers are contributing to that as well, because they all are trying to build, lookbooks or image galleries or whatever. And so they're all kind of in this together, which is a really interesting trend. The other thing that we see coming up a lot is GraphQL is completely transforming how content flows across the internet. It was a technology that was open sourced out of Facebook to solve their big data problems. But it turns out that the way that GraphQL functions, it's significantly more efficient for delivering things. You'll see apps and page load times go down, especially on mobile. But more importantly, the way that GraphQL was crafted, it's significantly easier to use, and it essentially offers more or less a standardization layer on top of all your APIs. And so the benefit of that is it's way easier to onboard developers. You can onboard more junior developers because they don't need to know the differences between 16 different APIs. They can just use a single API as a point of reference for whatever they're doing. And GraphQL is very well self-documenting. So, you can essentially bring new engineering teams up and going a lot faster, which is I'd mentioned being able to hire more junior engineers, but also team switching. Engineers bounce around teams a lot. Rather than having to learn a new set of APIs, they can continue to use GraphQL. And it's gotten to the point where it's almost making SDKs obsolete. No longer do companies have to build SDKs to help engineers figure out their APIs. GraphQL will solve a lot of the challenges that we've seen SDKs and solve over the last decade. And so, there's a big question as to whether this whole kind of SDK middle layer will even be required 3 or 4 years from now.
Thanks, Paul. It's a really great point. I think that a few people have touched on, and that part of this headless approach is keeping up with the pace of all these new developments and new technologies. And front-end developers are famous for having to try to keep up with the latest technologies, and also for dumping them within 6 months of them not being cool anymore. So we've talked a lot about preparing for the future and about the latest trends. And I know you guys just mentioned who knows what's going to happen in 2 years from now. So I'm going to put you all on the spot and tell me what is going to happen in a couple of years from now. So I want you to make a prediction for the future in this headless space. And I will remind you this session is being recorded. You go first, Paul.
Prediction for the future. I think the companies that we see innovating the most, I think, are setting the path for where this is all going to go, which is they're not just replatforming their technology and kind of rethinking about their approach to MarTech, but I touched on this briefly earlier about completely recreating the teams who were a part of their go-to-market strategy. So, we see people building these digital labs, these digital factories, these innovation centers. They come under a bunch of different names. We've kind of centralized on the concept of digital factories, which folks like McKinsey have written a ton about. But basically the hypothesis is that, especially in an enterprise environment, these new cross-functional digital teams, which are usually kind of led by some kind of digital leader that was appointed by the C-suite to kind of lead the, air quote, digital transformation. But they're given license to break all the rules. So they can find budget from new places. They can hire new teams. They can do things that are outside of the traditional scope of IT. And you'll see companies literally, if you go to Toronto, you'll see folks like Scotiabank who have like a digital factory building, or folks like TELUS who have literally cleared out entire floors of their corporate tower and moved teams, cross-functional teams, into these new places and knocked down all the cubes and put up whiteboards. And so I think the changes that we're seeing are not just about the technology, but about how companies are thinking about getting to market faster. And so it's kind of this triad of people, process, and technology. And we've obviously spent a lot of time talking about the technology and some of the processes, but I think, and the roles too, the people. So if you kind of tie all that together, you know, you're going to see these agile teams kind of breaking out inside of companies to change all the rules. And then you're going to see everything that they've built be reabsorbed back into the broader organization. So I think there's a whole model for how you get things to market, how you launch products, how you optimize the customer journey, is literally being put in the hands of some of these brand new teams. And so I see that driving a lot of what the headless CMS market has to accommodate for, which is how do you not just support better, more sophisticated customer experiences, but how do you support better internal processes and operational things so you can keep up with your customers?
Great. Wow, it's quite a vision. Thanks, Paul.
So we will check
Boris?
on it in like 5 years, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So those are very good points. I think we see it similarly. And I see it also in the workshops I'm running. Cross-functional teams and teams who are involved in content creation, in business process, have to work together in order to deliver a strong experience for your customers. So from my point of view, the collaboration part of creating content will be even more important in the future. And not only that, the whole headless approach, I think, is simply the way to go. I was really confused at first when I heard about headless myself. So when we started this project, this internal startup in the company, it took me like a month or so to wrap my head around it. So I really didn't understand what it means. After 1.5 months, maybe I was getting the concept of headless, but more and more so the last 3 years and 11 months. So after the 1 month of confusions, I think really this is the way to go. Specialization in general is the way forward, as you can see in many companies. Take an example, taxis, Uber, hotels, Airbnb. These companies are specializing into a specific process or into a specific service within this area of services. So from my point of view, headless is the future. And, you know, if you jump on the train of headless sooner than later, this will enable you to create high quality content, which is ready for the future. So yeah, that's my view. Again, you can check it in 5 years.
Thanks, Boris.
So let me just pick out one. And I'm actually stealing this from our inspiration series that we did last year as IBM, and that is this adaptive content idea. So one thing that that I think that is already happening, but we'll see much more mainstream, is that when I go to a site, I'm going to get something that's just for me. So you might think, well, what's that got to do with headless? Well, headless is then the content engine that lets you do that. So when you move from having a fixed site to having just a pool of content, and you kind of, we say it's like you throw a net in and you pull out content just for that channel. What if it's not just for that channel? What if it's just for that interaction at that time with that person? And so you start to personalize each and every experience. So when I go to Facebook now, you know, I see something that's just my unique feed, and Facebook does a lot of work to work out what to show you. But when I go over to Maya, I go over to Kmart, I go to Big W, I go to any kind of commerce site, I just see the same thing as the next person sees. So I think what you'll see is that will start to change more and more. It happens now a little bit where we'll say, right, this spot on the page, this is going to be personalized. Where I think we'll get to in the next few years is where the entire experience will be personalized. And I think the challenge for us is then what do you do in terms of kind of measuring that? If everyone has a unique experience, how do we start to work out what works? You know, what's successful, what's working, what's not working? When the site breaks for someone, how do I ever recreate what that experience was that broke? Once I'm personalizing stuff, how do I keep track of how I'm deciding what to personalize and for which channels? And yeah, that's the challenge. So that's where I think we'll be in the future. And we'll kind of look back and think, wow, I remember when like websites were just the same for everyone. That was just stupid.
I think I saw that in a couple of terrifying science fiction movies from time to time, that hyper-personalization. Mick?
We may not need to worry about it because Trump is president. Boris is Prime Minister, who knows? Look, I think, more serious, I think headless is just a cog in the wheel. It's a technology enabler. It's not the one thing that's going to drive the future of technology, right? It's just one element to it. So I think it's all about options. It's providing a way to do something and to service content in an omnichannel way. I think artificial intelligence is that one of those buzzwords that's really come up and is driving that. I can't disagree around the personalization sort of things. It's not so much just delivering that content in an omnichannel way, but it's delivering it in a personalized way to the right people at the right time. The content creation thing is key element in all of that. If you start thinking about all the content that you've got to do for all of those experiences, you want a way to actually do that in the most efficient way possible. So I think the future is going to be helping orchestrate content, making those decisions for you about what content is working. Because it's one thing about pushing the content out. How do you know if it actually works? How do you measure the content is actually working for you? So having the ability to do that, to measure that content and then push out the most effective content to the right people at the right time and on the right device, I think that's where we're heading towards. I think you're going to see headless as an enabler, and you're going to see all of these other things wrap around that to really drive what we now expect out of our experiences, which is to be personalized to. I should not... an example that we use is going into if I go and look for a new jacket, and then I go into Maya to have a look at, for that jacket, I should get a personalized experience. Why shouldn't the staff there know that I've been looking at a jacket online, that they can help cross-sell to me for other things? Maybe you're just not looking for a jacket. Maybe you want the really good set of pants and shirt to go with it. So it's about drawing all of that content, but being able to help that experience along the way. That's where the future's going. We're going to be personalized to in every way, which is not a bad thing. I think if you do it right and you're very mindful of what that process is, it can be very effective.
Yeah, we've definitely seen examples of where people have gone too far already, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks. So we're starting to push towards the 7:30 marks. So what I might do, there's one last question I want to get a quick little response out of all of you, and then I'm going to move to the Slido questions after this. So if you've got a burning question, there are some queuing up in Slido. So I'll pick a few of the top ones there and maybe drill a couple of people with those questions. But one thing I just want to close out my set of questions with is, and try to narrow it down to one succinct piece of advice based on your experience and what you've seen. If someone's considering going headless, what is the one burning piece of advice you would give them? Maybe a word of warning?
Yep. Mine would be, don't forget about who's managing the content. If I look back in experience and I go in and talk, and this happens all of the time, the biggest complaint is it's hard to manage the content. It's hard to do that process. So I think headless definitely is becoming, or has been, more of a IT enablement. We're seeing those decisions being driven by IT, but don't forget the people who are actually working with the content on a day-to-day process. What is their experience like? If their experience is hard and problematic, then that's just going to feed back up the chain. So work from the beginning and make sure that they are being enabled in the right way by the technology to help drive that all the way through headless as a technology.
Great.
For just one thing, I would say start to think about content differently. So rather than thinking about it as, fixed pages, fixed bits of content, if this is truly something that you want to be able to reuse, you need to really consider that from the start. What kind of marketer doesn't care what it looks like at the other end? Every marketer cares about that. So really think, what would this be like in this channel? What would I want this to be like in this channel? Because each channel comes with its different limitations and its different advantages. That'd be my one thing.
From my point of view, it would be lay the groundwork. Make sure you have your personas defined. Make sure you have content audit in place, let's say yearly or bi-yearly, just to make sure your content is top-notch. Because content, as I mentioned in the beginning, is, from our point of view, your biggest asset. It's what you are selling. That's how you look. That's how your customers see you. So lay the groundwork, make sure everyone collaborates on it, make sure they use a great environment. That's where it's pleasure to work with the content. And yeah, make sure your content strategy is in place, and you have always someone to talk to. So either it could be a local partner, or anyone who can help you with kind of decisions. And yeah, that's pretty much from my side.
Thanks, Boris. Paul?
Great. Yeah, I'd echo the points about thinking about content differently and thinking about atomic structured content. And I also agree that you have to remember the practitioners, the content editors. We were talking with a leading technology company about their rollout. And one of the questions was, well, did you talk to the editors about this? Like, no, we just made this decision because it was the best technology platform. And those are the kinds of projects that you'll see go sideways fairly quickly. But one other thing I suppose worth mentioning is, make sure that they understand that, these systems do require developers to get up and off the ground, or partners like Luminary, which is why we're all here today. Because, I'd say 60 to 70% of our projects are in partnership with someone who's doing a lot of the heavy lifting for the teams who are doing the implementation, so that they just need to know they need a backstop of developers who are ready to act on this. This is not your traditional install, log in, and you're good. There's a little bit more to the process. So just understanding kind of where the effort is required, differently than like going up and signing up for a WordPress.org account or something, that you might be able to install yourself as a business user. Just making sure that it's abundantly clear where the effort is when they're getting started.
Thanks, Paul. I promise I didn't plant that answer. So thanks, thanks, Paul. We're going to move to Slido now. So I have not moderated these questions, but I think this should switch us over. Okay, so you can jump in and vote for the questions on your phones or whatever. What I'm probably going to do is maybe I'll try to get through a few of these questions. There are some pretty clearly top-rated ones there, and I'll move through them, and I'll try to maybe direct it at one person first. If you're absolutely burning to answer it, maybe shake your hands in the air. Otherwise, I'll pick someone. So the first one, we've got a question from Ray. Thanks for your question. How does the approach for content personalization differ in a headless approach versus the traditional approach? So Matt, you pointed to it earlier about personalizing this specific area of the page. Maybe you can talk about how that's different.
Yeah, sure. So I think opportunity is the big difference. So with a traditional CMS, it's really hard to generally you kind of grab the piece of content that you want and then you put it in. Whereas with a truly headless, limitless content pool, you're grabbing content that's totally unique. So you need an engine that scales. So really, I think that's kind of, it might seem like it's the same effect, but behind the scenes, you really need a content engine that you can do that with. And so that's where you couldn't do that with WordPress necessarily. The other thing is then it's all well and good to talk about personalization, personalize each and every experience. Then you need that to actually scale. Like if you've got 10,000 people every minute looking at your website, then you want it to actually work and be responsive. So I think the opportunity for personalization is much greater with headless. How you actually kind of determine the rules, like what am I doing it on, location, what do I know about the person, email, all those things, that might actually be the same, but headless just lets you grab the content using the queries that you want at the time and really use that properly. That'll be mine.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
Look, I think Paul's actually touched on this a little bit as well. I think from a personalization and optimization perspective, I think with headless, it's that just looking at the MarTech stack that you have to work towards, right? So if it doesn't offer that, then you're more than likely having to go out and source out another technology. There's a fantastic slide if you Google it on the MarTech stack globally, and it's like thousands and thousands of products out there, which is pretty daunting if you're trying to get into that space. Well, what do you actually choose? So yeah, it's does the headless capability also come with some of those other features as well, that you can actually get that capability straight away, that when you request that API endpoint, that the response that you get back is contextual to the user who's asked for it. So not just from the content, but the layout and the actual experience they're wanting. If you can get that out of a platform and having that headless capability, that's a pretty powerful thing.
Great.
And I can add something too. You know, one of the other advantages of headless that we've seen our customers talking a lot about for personalization is that you can really optimize it on the server side a lot more effectively. So one of the challenges with a lot of the kind of JavaScript-based, client-based personalization technologies is you get screen flashes. It goes slow, especially when you have fairly complex personalization environments with lots of overlapping audiences that need to be sorted out. And then especially when you start doing programmatically, like was mentioned earlier, where, you know, one of our big travel app aggregators shows a different page to every single person who visits. And while we have the technology in place to facilitate all that logic, it takes a long time to round trip from figuring out a user and figuring out what to show them. And so by moving everything to a server, to the server side, you can do a lot more rapid delivery of some of these highly personalized experiences. You know, everyone's trying to get under, you know, 200, 100 milliseconds so that customers aren't impacted by pages that load slow because you're trying to hyper-personalize, which ultimately, if you've got a slow page, it hurts the business, right? Google's going to ding you, so you're going to get lower SEO. You're going to get higher bounce rates. You won't even get at bats with these customers. And generally, the user experience is slower. And so folks, you know, in this fast-paced world, they won't put up with that. So that's another big advantage of going headless for personalization.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, it's like the old, back in the day with slow internet connections, used to be the flash of unstyled content. It's now the flash of unpersonalized content, isn't it? So this is obviously the burning question in the room. It's been voted. I did brief the guys on maybe being nice to each other, but I'll give you a chance if you can be brief. Maybe I'll get you to just pick a key. What's your USP? Your one killer feature that you believe you have over the competition.
Got the mic, I'll start. I sort of alluded it to in my last answer, if you could maybe get the undertones there. Look, I mean, we have had that strong history in web content management. You know, it goes back, that's where we were born and bred in our history. And evolving in that now, we provide that full marketing stack, and optimization and personalization is one of those keys. So I think one of the things that we've evolved in our headless capabilities to actually build a single page app in React, Angular or Vue, and actually have a full editing experience that you would have out of a content editor in that inline. What you see is what you get interface, but also retain all of the elements and features that you get with Sitecore around personalization and optimization. You get all of that along the way. So it's a no compromise solution from a headless perspective. So it's just options. We want to make sure that we're providing as many options to the community to build the best applications out there.
All right, gloves are off.
Yeah. So it's funny that I'm kind of sitting in the middle, because I feel like we're a little bit in the middle in this particular point. So, you know, headless CMSs that are born to be. That was good technique. You know, they're really geared for grabbing that content, doing it fast. You know, everything's cached, highly configured for CDN delivery, really well geared, and we try to be exactly that from the ground up. On the other side, though, you've got a marketing and content team who want to be able to use a nice authoring interface. That's exactly where we've come from with, you know, the Sitecores, the Adobes of the world. And so we really try to be in the middle there as well. And so really tackle both of those problems. So with Acoustic Content, the artist formerly known as IBM Watson Content Hub, it really is trying to be both of those things. So a fully scaled distributed content engine, but also giving you the ability to do inline editing and that kind of hybrid approach that you're describing. And I think that, yeah, that will probably be our one thing. The other thing is that our labs are in Sydney, which is not all of our labs, but that's kind of good because for at least us, we get to really sit down with the developers, go through showcases, and feedback into the product. And I actually think sitting in Australia, that's pretty unique. So
Thanks, Matt.
cool.
Boris?
So I'm not sure about our competition, but we throw quite good parties in Kentico.
You win.
I know I love German beer, but Czech beer is also quite good. Other than that, yeah, we've got an office in Sydney, so you can pop in. I think in general, our user experience and content editing experience is quite nice. Again, I haven't used the competition products, so I can't compare. But from my point of view, that's a really strong suit. And yeah, try to reach out to our support guy. So if you try to message them right now, the average response time is something like 2 minutes. So yeah, give it a go.
All right, 2-minute response time.
All right. I mean, from our perspective, Contentful obviously has a different trajectory than a lot of the traditional CMSs, where we were born as a developer platform to take advantage of how companies were architecting their applications in the cloud. And so, one example is one of our large global CPG companies. Every time they launch a new product, they have a bunch of automated QA. They have to do a bunch of translation and localization. So every time they launch a new product, they literally spin up 70 Contentful instances, clone it, clone the launch, and then have their bots attack it, have their security teams look at it, have their editors and translators go through the motions, and then they spin them all down and launch. And so that kind of like spin up fleets and spin down fleets and go through all of these kind of software delivery pipelines is really where Contentful was born. And I think that, when you compare vendors, you can definitely see that we kind of were all cut from different cloths. Now, that being said, obviously Contentful's, biggest challenge ahead is to accommodate for what some of the other folks here said today, which is how do we improve our editorial practitioner experience, because, they're ultimately the ones who are responsible for producing all the content that goes into these applications that are built. And so, that end, 2019, we kind of declared the year of the practitioner, and have spent many hackathons and refocused product teams on, helping make the editorial experience much more familiar and usable by all of our end users in that regard. And so, obviously, we're still working hard on that, but I think that's the big kind of difference you'll see is what the kind of founding roles were that these companies were trying to solve problems for. And now it's a little bit of a race to the middle of, who can provide the best developer experience, who can provide the best end user or editor experience. And I think that's where, there's just that's how a lot of these platforms differ.
Thanks very much, Paul. We're approaching the 7:45 mark when I promised we would move on. So I might start cherry picking a little bit, and I'm up the front, so I get to choose. The one I actually want to hear, we've talked a little bit about personalization. We've talked about the split between front and back end and everything, but this is an interesting one here. If you go IoT, so there's Dinesh has asked, also Dinesh, you get rewarded for putting your name in. So you jump the queue. 26 billion IoT devices connected to the internet. How does Headless help with IoT? So going right down to that micro level of delivery. And do you have any examples? Does anyone have a really good example of IoT? Oh, we've got people wielding microphones here. They want to try it. Boris, give us an IoT use case.
Yes, so we had a customer who, for example, used Headless to deliver labels on their aircon display panels. So pretty much, yeah, any content you collaborate on is content which you can theoretically host and collaborate on in a headless environment. So yeah.
So there was labels on air conditioners, was it? Oh,
yeah, on the AC, the control panels.
No. Okay.
So that would be an example. But yeah, this can be applied to literally anything. So anywhere where you have some display panel, let's say smart fridges, simple things like labels, descriptions, information.
Yeah.
You may not think of this being content which can come from a headless solution, but if it's hosted in one place, in one content hub, it's much easier to keep it updated, to keep it in place with your manuals and so on and so forth. So yeah, That would
Cool.
be my example.
Another good IoT.
We've got a customer that they sell lawnmower equipment, ride-on lawnmowers, snow plowing equipment, and all of those, or all of that machinery actually has IoT devices inside of them. So it's actually monitoring, how often it's being run, how long it's being run for, and it's sending all of that information back. And they're basically using Sitecore then to deliver out the content both through the web channel but also to their native mobile app to give information about when is your next service due based off the usage that you've had, but then also service back content around how you should be performing maintenance on changing the oil if you want to do it yourself and all those sorts of things. So it's actually understanding how you're actually using the products and then serving the content back to those different channels that you're utilizing. So I think IoT is only where everyone's probably got mobile device or watches. So it's just serving it out to the right device at the right time.
Great. Cool.
Just a quick one from me. So I don't know that I'd strictly call this Internet of Things, but ATMs now do a lot of advertising. And so we've been working with one of the banks on delivering content that's then unique on different ATMs. At the moment, they spend a lot of time curating content, but again, it's the same content often for everywhere. Imagine in a content engine where you can then index content by geolocation. So you have kind of one bit of code that says, get me content that's closest to where I am right now. In every device now, it's actually really easy to get geolocation. Even if there's no GPS, you can get that location. So every ATM suddenly is showing the content that's most relevant for where it is. You wheel it into a brand new location and it's just showing the content that's relevant for right there. You're a bank with an ATM in a university, can show stuff that's relevant, that's tagged for that particular branch. So I think that's just a quick one.
Awesome. All right. Paul, are you happy to move on, or you got a good IoT quick one?
Sure, yeah. A couple examples come to mind. I mean, one of our cruise line companies uses us for their on-ship experiences. So when you're in your room, either they've got a digital display of some sort or the TV itself, depending on how they manifest that experience. All the restaurants have a little kiosk out front so you can see the menu. And when you're looking at the entertainment center, they have like the agendas and things like that for the entertainers, and all that's managed. All those different screens are managed through Contentful. And the other interesting thing about a system like a headless CMS setup in that regards is that oftentimes these ships aren't on the internet, right? They lose connectivity a lot as they're cruising around, and so many headless CMSs have sync capabilities, so you can kind of preload all the content out in case you lose internet connectivity, so that all these things don't go down. So that's another, like, connectivity is a big issue with IoT, and so having sophisticated sync APIs to kind of keep everything up to date anytime there's a chance of an internet connection is just another important consideration for IoT.
Great, thanks. So we're over time, so I'm going to go, because I can see a yes or no question. So I'm going to finish with one question, and you have to answer yes or no, and then we're going to mill about, and you can come and approach the guys, ask some questions. Does this spell the end of back-end development?
No.
No.
Paul?
No.
No. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you. That's the end of the official part of the panel. I'll hand back over to Adam.
Just take over here. Firstly, look, again, thanks everyone for coming tonight. Really appreciate your time. I'd just like to, if you join me in thanking our panelists tonight. And I've got a little gift for you. It's we're celebrating our 20 years this month, Luminary 20 years. And part of that is that we've gone fully carbon neutral. And obviously we want to stop people from using disposable coffee cups. So we're going to give our panelists Luminary coffee cups. So thank you. Thanks, guys. And to go in those coffee cups, we also have some wine to give you as well. Mike, if you can bring those out. Thanks, guys. And thanks again, everyone, for coming.
Thanks very much, Paul.